Today I wanted to talk with you about how you can install Linux firmware. Let's give a case example. Let's say you're using something that is focused on open source firmware, something like Debian or something else. It doesn't always include some of that proprietary blob firmware. So you need to find a way to install the driver, to install the firmware so that you can use, let's say, your Wi-Fi card that is not built into the firmware that comes pre-installed on your Linux distribution. My first recommendation is to first search your operating system, your Linux distribution, to find the brand or the firmware that meets this device. And this could be any kind of hardware device that you don't have the firmware for. It could be something like an SDR, or it could be something like a Wi-Fi card, or anything else. This accounts for anything. So let's say it's an Atheros. Well, then you might do something like apt search Atheros to see what kind of firmware. And look at that. We have firmware-Atheros. If I wanted to install this, if I had an Atheros device, I might do apt install firmware-Atheros, and that would install the binary firmware for Qualcomm and Atheros wireless devices. So in other cases, you may want to search for the brand within the operating system. Of course, that's going to be one of the safest ways that you can install the firmware, because of course there's always going to be risk when you're downloading random things, but when you're at least going to the official distribution sources, you're that much safer. You might be asking yourself, well, what if I don't know what chip it's running? What if I don't even know what I need firmware for? Plug your device up. Let's look at some commands. Here are two helpful commands. You have lsusb and lspci. These can help reveal what you're looking for the firmware for. So in our case, we have a PCI Wi-Fi device, which is an Atheros AR9462. Now, I was able to get open source supported firmware for this, but if you have something that isn't supported out of the box, you may need to search for AR9462 firmware, and most importantly, you need to make sure you get the one that is supported by your current kernel. To find out your current kernel, and this is assuming that you can't get the firmware from your Linux distribution. If you have to compile it from source code, you first want to identify your kernel to ensure you get the firmware that is supported by your current kernel. Now, uname -a is going to reveal the kernel that you're running at that moment, and then what that means is you're going to want to get the Linux headers for this exact kernel. Anytime you have to compile in a new kernel module, you're going to need to get the Linux headers for that exact kernel. As you can see, I've already installed it, but in your case, it may not be installed. Anytime you're going to add new firmware that you're compiling from source, you're going to need to get the Linux headers for the Linux kernel that you're running at that moment. So you're going to want to install the Linux-headers. That package is going to contain the Linux headers that you're going to need to compile in a new kernel module firmware. I don't need to compile any firmware today, but I did want to share with you that the first thing you're going to want to do is look for the firmware for the specific device that you are trying to get support for first from your Linux distribution. From there, you might want to check the actual company for the device you're trying to get firmware for. See if they offer a .deb package or something else that is compatible with your system. If you can't find this, what you might want to do is then have to find the actual firmware that's supported by your current kernel, as I just showed you. I don't want to drag this video out too long. So in short, what you'll need to do is find the firmware that says it's supported by your kernel, get the Linux headers, and then compile that firmware to install it. Then also, there's also a command that will want to use something like mod probe to actually load that firmware. And also, worst case, or at least when all else fails, try rebooting and see if it loads on the next boot. But first, of course, you're going to need the Linux headers. If you're compiling from source code to load the module into your kernel, you're going to need the exact Linux-headers for the kernel you're running. You can grab the kernel version by uname -a, and then, of course, you're going to compile that firmware. You're going to load it with mod probe, and then you might want to reboot. And I wanted to show an example using the mod probe command to try and load the kernel module, which is my Wi-Fi firmware. I would run mod probe, and then the name of the kernel module firmware that I'm trying to load. And this can go for whatever your particular device is that you're trying to load. So first you have to install the firmware, but then afterwards you may want to try and load it with this command. And when all else fails, just try rebooting and see if it loads then, and see if that works for you. So in most cases, you're going to find support right out of the box with the majority of Linux distributions. But on those off cases where you have a piece of hardware that maybe isn't supported out of the box and detected and loaded with firmware right away, you may have to go through some of these steps. I hope this helps you. Make sure to share, favorite, and follow for more.